Originally, I was planning to do 2 separate videos, one on the flora and one on the fauna of the inner earth, but I quickly realized that it is so integrated, especially in the inner earth, that I needed to do it in one video. So let us begin. First, I wish to read to you from issue 1, 1981 of my publication, The Source, which was an ongoing publication actually for 19 years. I changed the name of it to Temple Doors somewhere along the way. A golden lion reclines on the limb of a giant baka tree. Slits of amber peer from his mantled face, intent on an approaching form. A lone young man walks under the tree. Such a dramatic confrontation to us is most certainly the prelude to a violent recourse and will end in a likely death for either the man or the lion. But this scene is not taking place in the wild habitat of the surface world. It is instead a not uncommon moment of communication within the nature kingdom of the Central Earth domain. The young man and the lion have never seen each other before, yet there is no exchange of fear. They coexist through a mutual regard for an interspecies alliance. Through the ability of the inner earth inhabitant walking toward the lion, he projects ahead of him an auric chord, a silent tone which is received by the large cat. This is a signal to the beast which gives him immediate cognition of the intent of the approaching human, and that human's unique character blueprint. The lion responds by an auric intonement of his own. The two are now entrained to begin a mental communication. This scenario is an everyday occurrence in Subterranea. The flora and fauna of the Central Earth are maintained by the high-order devas, or high nature spirits, of Earth through the vital flow of communication and rapport with the human population of the interior world. There are 2 main factors which are essential considerations in the maintenance of the subterranean nature realm. These are the limited ecosphere of the Earth's interior cavity, which is more fragile than the surface counterpart because of several fundamental differences in the outer and inner ecospheres, and the vegetarian existence of the entire human and wildlife population within. Not only are the human subterraneans of the Central Earth tribes strict vegetarians, but their animal companions are also. It is difficult to imagine the king of beasts gnawing on a carrot and blanching at a rare gazelle flank, but as comical and almost emasculating as this would seem to our orientation with wild animals, a meatless society, whether in the animal world or the human civilization, is the only natural one. In the true genesis of this planet, eons before our scientists can imagine life to have combusted upon the murky shores of Earth, many of the present species were existent and were vegetarian in their consumption. The lion of the Central Earth varies little from the ancient lions of Atlantis, who until the latter part of the Atlantean epoch dieted on legumes, radishes, and thick inland marsh seaweed of the Atlantean rainforests. I'd like to pause here for a moment. So you might say, how is this possible? When we see how a species evolves, we have the skeletons, we see the saber-toothed tigers, we see all this evolving species. But there's several factors involved here. One is that Lemuria and Atlantis were in another level of experience, vibrationally. Now, they weren't in the lotus reality, which was the first level. They'd come down the stalk, and they were in the more physical world. However, there was a change of spectrum, of timeline, of a lot of things with what Thoth calls the time tsunami that happened in Atlantis that caused us to separate from the natural Rana wave, time wave, which is not a timeline. And when that happened, changes occurred, evolutionary changes, as well as the ability to perceive other realms of experience. Now, this is a whole other topic, so I'm not going to go deeply into it here. We can do that on another video. And I think I actually have, to some extent, on the one on the Rana time wave in the Kali Rift. But it could bear further exploration. However, for the purpose of this video, I just wish to say that was present. There were actual horses in Atlantis, 10,000 years ago, real horses like, we see today, even more beautiful. And yet, if you ask an evolutionist, they say, oh my God, no, they were little tiny creatures wandering around. So there's a lot of things that the current scientists don't understand because of the dimensionality of our experience. So now to continue. Because of the initial fragility of the inner earth nature kingdom, a control of propagation is enacted by the high order nature devas. This is accomplished through the great medicine societies of the central earth, who commune with the Noshas or high devas, requesting certain growth controls, temperature adjustments, etc. Much like the American Indian rain dancers, the Central Earth Medicine Societies join with nature to create a harmonious exchange. The interior peoples do not neglect or abuse their terra firma. It is regarded as sacred ether. Each society of the medicine wheel is entrusted with a specific nature channel. The communications between the human and nature worlds are a prayerful and loving revelation. It is a bonding of auras between two rivers of Earth's radiant field. Like genders in consciousness, the nature and human aspects are thought of as female and male, respectively. The topic of the nature realm within our earth is so vast in its illumination, so absorbing in its revelation of an entirely unique understanding, that I cannot possibly do justice to the scope of this subject within the pages of this issue. Instead, I will touch upon the outstanding points and discuss a few of the more intriguing animal species. First, certain qualifications need be stated. The scale of size for all living things within the central hollow of this planet is larger than it is among surface life. This is due to the aforementioned differences in the interior ecosphere, the major difference being the increase in the ether contact, which produces a more rapid stimulus of the atomic structure closer to the core of a rotating sphere. Although it differs among races within the tribes, a woman of Subterranea is considered of average height in most cultures at 6'2 to 6'3, and a man's average height is from 6'4 to 6'6. There is a proportionate increase in size of animals and vegetation also. On the rare occasions when surface humans are introduced into the interior civilizations, they are given treatments of magnetoreflex to aid them in their gradual growth. As an atomic weight nears the core of a planet, it will decrease, causing an increase in the oscillation of the particles' atomic parts. This will, when interpolated with several other factors, all interconnected to the same stimulus, such as oxygen density, etc., cause an extension in the growth ratio of the life mass. Now I want to pause for a moment. When I wrote this material way back in 1981, I was not aware at the time that there was a dimensional shift when you moved from the surface of the planet into the interior. This little detail was not in my Akashic vocabulary. So I learned of this later, probably in the early 1990s. But if we fit that piece that was missing into what I'm writing here, that makes the difference. In other words, the statement, as an atomic weight nears the core of a planet, it will decrease, causing an increase in the oscillation of the particle's atomic parts. That would only take place in a quantum field that is generated from such a situation where the dimensional shift is occurring through the quantum field. So if you were to try to do this as an experiment in a laboratory and you didn't interject that dimensional shift, you wouldn't get this result. I just want to say that for any scientists out there that are listening to this. In discussing the animals of Central Earth, I will divide them into 3 categories. 1, those species and breeds which are a preserved form of an original species of the ancient surface world, such as Lemuria and Atlantis, and are almost identical to surface counterparts. This is due to the fact that many of our modern animal breeds are actually recreations of ancient types. I might also add that species were brought in later as well. In the Egyptian times, even up to medieval times, some animals have been brought in. And actually, there could be even more recent times than that. Through the cycle of reincarnation, humanity assumes repeated confrontations with himself and other life he affects. This is to complete the thought that there are recreations of ancient species coming around again. The second category is ancient species of the surface world which have not been reintroduced through the cyclic wave to the outer earth. Now, this is a little difficult to understand, but what is being said here is that the first category of species has often been reintroduced to the planet from the inner earth. So we have horses in Atlantis that look like horses during Alexander the Great. There are 2 factors involved. One is that humanity tends to recycle its direction in consciousness, which affects the natural realm. But it has also been aided in this regard by inner earth species, on certain occasions, being directly reintroduced to the surface earth when all of the species ecology was basically brought back to the Stone Age again. It need be reiterated, which I have in past videos, that the civilizations in the inner earth are peoples who have migrated from the surface earth with the help and the alliance of their star kindred, our star kindred, for the purpose of preserving the genetics of not only humanity, but animal and plant species as well. Thus, the reintroduction of some of these more ancient, refined species, such as horses and dogs and lions or whatever, has been brought back to the surface of the planet, giving a jump in evolution. So now we return to category 3, animal species originating in the inner realm, which are solely indigenous to that realm. So now let us look at some of the creatures in the inner earth. One of the most beautiful creatures existing within the perennial floral gardens of Subterranea is the original bird of paradise, once flourishing upon the continents of Lemuria and Atlantis in the light of the solar sun. It bore a name which meant beautiful, Marie, M-A-R-I-E, a delicate swirl of shimmering feathers and glorious colors. The Marie bird is a large fowl whose lacy wings could not support it in flight through the mechanics of aerodynamics. Yet this elegant bird does fly, the larger ones capable of carrying a grown man in flight. The Marie's gift of flight is bestowed upon it through the gravitational field of Earth and the power of the sun. On the tip of each wing feather there is enthroned a magical sun cell. When vibrated by the bird as it shivers its fanned-out wings, each of these cells absorbs photonic waves from the sun that then employs these waves as synthesizers for the attraction, modification, and amplification of the current Earth's magnetism flowing through the mass of the bird. This enables the Marie to fly, but it also sustains its most elementary life functions. Without the process of a somewhat advanced photosynthesis within its sun cells, the large Marie would expire. The Marie's entire neurovascular system is bound up in this process in order for the body as a whole to absorb the charge simultaneously created by the photomagnetic process. Thus, the Marie's presence under the eternal sun of the central earth is ideal for its propagation, although its number is carefully controlled and does not roam outside the gardens which provide its special diet. There is no night in the earth below, but there is a period of dusk as the cycle of the earth's interior gravity and the inner sun's pulsing pulls the vapor clouds toward the central sunatoma, causing a beautiful aurora borealis of sun colors in the sky, bringing the day to a close with a twilight lasting for several hours before the full light returns once again. In the mornings and evenings, after the total impact of twilight and before its departure, the Maries can be seen performing an elaborate sun dance, fanning their bright-colored wings in fluid form, gracefully bending, dipping, and strutting as if in mating ritual. It is a type of mating dance in that this performance is integral to the continuation of their species. In order to survive, they must court the sun. From the beak of the Marie there curls an extension of ivory. The ivory tusk of this majestic fowl is a symbol of its unequaled sovereignty among the pilgrims of the sky. I'm not going to read much more about the animals in the inner earth that comes from that issue, but I just want to talk about it a little. Cats are very prominent in the inner earth, but not a whole lot of breeds. All these breeds that we have. They are more wild-like in appearance for the most part. The closest that we have that is related to the cats in the inner earth are the lynx, the Maine Coon, forest cat, Himalayans, probably a few other breeds that we have like ragdoll or whatever that really are part Himalayan and all of that. There's the Aussie cat, but they aren't very strictly breeds like we have now. It's like the absolute Aussie cat or the absolute Himalayan. These are mixtures of what are in the inner earth, and they aren't separated so closely into breeds because they haven't in the inner earth bred them in that way. We're going to have this special cat, so we're going to breed it with all of this and get that. That's just not in their agenda in the inner earth. They let things occur more naturally. Yes, there's a controlled element of necessity in regard to environment and space and all of that, but even that is conducted with a communion of Gaia, the Mother Earth itself, helping to regulate that. Of course, then there are the wilder animals, like the lion, tiger, other large cats. But there's not a lot of difference in nature between what we would call domesticated in the inner earth, because they really are not domesticated. None of these animals are. They are agreeing to be more in the presence of human beings rather than living out in the forests all the time. There's an agreement there. So there are cats, dogs, other animals that are within the habitation of human beings, but they're not slaves of labor or little pets. They are part of the interchange between humanity and animal. And they live more closely in that environment in order to create that kind of a bonding. Then the wilder animals don't do that, but they certainly are approachable and can be communicated with. And in certain instances, when there's sacred ceremonies involved, they come forth to interact in those. This brings us to the canine species. And also there are dogs that they have in the human environment. And these are not, also they are not varied like a whole lot of species. Again, they're just certain ones. The chow dogs are very much present. They originate from really ancient times on the surface earth as well as in the inner earth. And they are present in what Thoth calls the Blue Star Valley, which is sort of an interdimensional valley in the Himalayas on the surface of the earth. Their role is rather prominent there. They're very psychic animals and very wise in many ways. Now, we have them in our homes here now, domesticated, and in the Eastern culture, we've brought them in and put them into our homes, and they're still really wonderful beings, but they are not as deep, shall we say, in responsiveness to humanity as the ones in the inner earth. There are other breeds as well, but again, even breeds is a term that implies they spend a lot of time breeding animals, which is not the case. However, it appears that, for instance, the chows stay chows. They don't wander genetically. So, and there are other breeds that seem to do that as well, but the relationship of how this comes about is different. It has to do with that sexual selectivity again, some kind of an intelligence in the inner earth that overlays or oversees the genetic selectivity of what goes on there. That is a natural state in some way, and not a product of human or animal will. However, with human beings, it is somewhat opposite in the sense that while, as I spoke about on women in SERAPHIM, to some extent men in SERAPHIM, there is a guidance of Gaia in regard to producing offspring. But the human element is very mixed. It's a very rainbow culture. In some areas it's more this, and in some areas it's more that, just like on the surface. But there's no constraint about you have to be one particular race or another. There's a great mixture there. So this seems to be more within the animal realm, and not entirely, just in certain areas. Why, I'm not sure, and I'm trying to keep this video rather short, so I'm not going to pursue that. On the wilder side, of course, there are wolves, very beautiful large wolves that are larger in relation to the human species than our current wolves would be, or most of them anyway. But they're not carnivorous. They eat vegetables. As difficult as that is to understand. One of the things about that is there's so much protein in the inner earth in vegetable matter that there is not here, or it's been depleted through the eons. It used to be, but no more. And probably it never was to the extent that it is in the inner earth. There's a lot of vegetable protein in the inner earth plants. We haven't even gotten to the plants yet. We're talking about the animals, but that's what sustains these large animals, is the amount of protein and the digestive systems. All of the beings in the inner earth, their digestive systems are right on target, so much so that there's very little excrement. There is some, but not anywhere near as much as there is on the surface of the earth. because they digest so well. And this goes for both human and animal. There are no, for instance, giraffes or elephants, or there are a lot of deer, gazelles, that kind of thing. There are certain pigs, but there aren't any wild boar. I could go on. Some things are just entirely missing in there, and others are present. Some of them very much resemble what's on the surface, and others are somewhat different, but of the same genetic strain. The only real creatures in the inner earth that are indigenous to that realm are lizards, snakes, although no poisonous snakes, and not a lot of them. They're like really large iguana-like lizards that you wouldn't find on the surface of the planet, and some that you would. I really don't pick up a lot of other indigenous species other than the morphogenetic creatures. And I have a video called the Morphic Creatures, which you'll find in the Inner Earth series as well. Even though I don't know how much I mention Inner Earth, they're certainly very present in it. And so I included that video in the Inner Earth collection. The Morphic creatures include unicorns, dragon-like little tiny dragons that sort of fly around. You could call them flying lizards, I guess, but not really. When you saw one, it really wasn't a flying lizard. It was a flying baby dragon. Not baby, but mini dragon. And other certain morphic creatures appear and disappear at times in the inner earth. That is a whole topic unto itself, but they're somewhat interdimensional, and yet they can physically appear. The unicorns are especially prominent there, and sometimes they even appear with wings, sometimes not. The main place for the unicorns, though, on a more continual basis, is in the Aura Healing Garden of the Greater Seraphim. I wrote rather extensively about the unicorns, but I'm not going to go into all of that here. We might make a special video on that at a later time. There are a lot of birds in the inner earth, beautiful, beautiful birds, as the Marie bird, but many others, parrots, doves, eagles, hawks, those giant birds that I mentioned in the Nirvana video that are eagle-like. They're amazing birds in the inner earth. And of course, all able to communicate with the human species. Now I do wish to read to you again from the 1981 issue of The Source. This is about dolphins in the inner earth. Now there are whales and a few other cetacean species, but the dolphins seem to rule in the oceans of the inner earth. It is within the crystal oceans of the indwelling domain that the animal species most linked to humanity resides. Like their sea surface cousins, the dolphins inspire the human mind to seek an ever closer passage through the shallows of genetic division and explore the deep pools of thought in which the dolphin is nurtured. In their world of embryonic fluid, there remains the cognitive splendor of the creative plunge down into the darkness of indigo through the rushes of breaking consciousness as that first moment expands into a shaft of light, and prisming from an imbued understanding a multiple perception in color. Turquoise, aqua, and violet gardens of reflective power are sown, diminishing sameness, strengthening oneness. And I quote, "And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." So the dolphin is forever one with the ritual of Genesis, bringing its frictionless form into morphic harmony with the traceless paths of the sea, leaping in quantum to the intoning music of the shifting earth. In endless experiencing of Mahatma, I am coming out of the earth forever. The subterranean dolphin, or shapa, is of two types, the golden and the blue. The blue is almost identical in coloring and markings to the surface species, varying only in a slight blue coloration to the gray tones. The golden dolphin is of a brown tone with a slight golden coloration, acting as a highlight to the skin. Both the blue and the golden are proportionately larger than their outer ocean relatives. In addition, the subterranean dolphins participate in active communication with the human element of the inner world. This communication with the dolphin is for the Central Earth tribes the capstone in the interspecies alliance. ESA is both a pledge of alliance and a working organization of communicators with the nature kingdom. To exchange thoughts and concepts with other species is not a single breakthrough or achievement. It must be constantly sought and continuously evolved. The conceptualization, rationalization, interpretation, and even imagination of a whale varies dramatically from those of an eagle, and even more so from the human reason. Each species has its own source nova, that moment of bursting being that brought it to the surface of living reality as a communal whole. A species is a nuclear family within the many frequencied bands of intellect. To truly exchange knowledge and perception of that knowledge, beyond the automatic response of acknowledgement that the other exists, there must be a symboled and associate pattern of concepts, a vector through which one idea form may migrate into another spectrum analogous to its integral meaning. Frequencies upon the intelligence bands must be correlated to the point of intimacy that initiates the united cry of oneness which echoes through the remote chambers of the infinitesimal. Those paths of atomic bonding threading through the ether and causing our inseparateness from all existence. The interspecies alliance combines the shamanistic power of the medicine societies with scientific astuteness and technology to turn keys in the doors between worlds of the mind. Their finely tuned plasma-based computers create encyclopedic graphics which are arranged to project homogeneous interceptions between consciousnesses. Holographic beams of advanced light forms reveal common associations and build bridges of awareness which differ from both source points, being an amalgam of the two frequency directives and a new nuclear field in its own right, termed a creaton, an atomic rhythm of consciousness created from the balance of its former nuclei. Communications with dolphins is a perpetual reach into this science of shared relations among living beings. The mind of this remarkable mammal is unique in its employment structure, in the way it receives, sorts, perceives, assimilates, and transmits knowledge. Although all species operate in similar subliminal channels for basic input-output function, they do not possess the multifaceted degrees of holographic in nature pattern response. Cradled in the microcrystallics of the dolphin's brain is an especially developed holocenter through which all ingoing mind current is reprocessed back into its original pure field, which is a holograph of infinite dimension. In order for any brain to process knowledge data, it must be transposed from simple to complex, as the mass of living matter functioning as a placebo for the mind. I am, therefore I think. I think, therefore I am. Is incapable of grasping the simple, which exhibits no associate factors, being in itself contained as an isolated sperm of generative thought in which one burst has access to the other, stringing together a train of illumination. The complex pattern must emerge from the simplistic cocoon. We think then through the breakdown of the one into infinity, returning through our primal attraction to contemplate the immutability of our birthing chamber. The dolphin, too, must distribute its thought in packages of multiplicity, but through its specialized nature, it can bend the light of reason backward and form a separate reality in the instantaneous knowing. While all sentient beings must view their world through a holographic lens, the dolphin can think both in complex structure and simple image. This enables them to communicate directly with all beings in four-dimensional sequence: sonic, optic, complex mental, and simple mental. While the four-dimensional powers are retained by luminaries, highly spiritualized beings of the Central Earth tribes, the dolphin performs this feat without the accompaniment of spiritualized intelligence. While certainly intelligent and of the earth spirit, animal soli differ from human souls in that they do not extend their will beyond the service of the Earth Mother. Human souls are not so incorporate. They are both mutable with the earth and possessors of divine stewardship over the earth. Thus, in the dolphin is found a living pulse registering in four-dimensional synchronicity, yet unlike advanced humanity, is not subjective to the knowledge tapped. It cannot sit in judgment, and therefore is an objective channel. Through the study of the dolphin's holomonic assimilation of earth waves, the very core of oneness may be glimpsed. The Shapa, or Central Earth species of dolphin, is especially attuned to the earth rhythm, living within the hollow of the planet in the higher frequency ether contact. Inner dwellers learn from the dolphin the impending changes in earth flow, such as the shifts of the tectonic plates, which can be detected as a future event by dolphins even before the sensitive subterranean computers can discern these movements. Like the unicorn, the dolphin is a healing messenger. Since the dolphin uses sonic vibration as its matrix of senses, it can affect the atomic line within cells and cause regeneration of tissue. Most people are aware of the loving and playful nature of the dolphin. Unlike the unicorn, who is selective, the dolphin is eager to touch both physically and mentally its human companions. The soli of the cetaceans, family order of dolphins and whales, is the most advanced on the evolutionary ladder of the animal kingdom. The dolphin reclines at the summit of the nature experience on this planet. We of the outer world must come to the edge of our ensouled sea and span the distance already bridged by our inner brethren. Until we recognize ourselves in nature, we cannot cast our light out into the heavens, where stars are exceedingly brilliant and our minds are yet too small to shine. Before we leave the topic of the dolphins, it was only later, I believe in early 2000, like 2001, 2, 3, in there somewhere, that Thoth expressed to me about the dolphins being part of our family, that in the lotus reality, we were one, and we divided before we came down the stem. So we are directly related to the dolphins in a unique way. We have a very similar, different, but very similar doctrine of signature. And this means that when we move into the world system 2, which we are calling the new Earth star, we will be back together with them. That we will create a species that is like what we had in the lotus, but different as well, because there's always moving forward, evolution into the starry path. That doesn't mean that we're going to be sea creatures with fins and tails and stuff, but we will have the human dynamic, the human template. The dolphins really are the ones that bent forward more and chose a somewhat different body form than we did. So when the return happens, it'll still be human as we understand it, but with a far greater capacity to be human. And so now back to issue 1981 of The Source. I cannot end this discourse on the nature kingdom of Subterranea without mention of the Nosha hovers. In the untrampled forests of our terrarium earth, there are to be seen misty clouds of light hovering above some trees. The high nature devas or noshas who govern and preside over the nature kingdom are able to become visible about an organic center where they manifest as hovers, remaining for indefinite periods of time, connecting and communicating with the region in their care. It is true that the nature sparks of all vegetal life can be seen by the aware on occasion, but not in the glorious and consistent manner as the Nosha hovers. It is a truly awesome sight to see such a light mist enshrouding a majestic tree. It is to these hovers that the emissaries of the medicine societies make pilgrimages in order to commune with the forces of nature. Some Noshas have continued to hover in one place for thousands of years. The most ancient of these hovers is found in Amazakol, a designated prayer garden. The garden was landscaped around the hover so that those who wished audience with the Nosha could have a meditative setting for the encounter. While much of the land in Subterranea is landscaped to a subtle geomantic order, conforming to the natural force lines and curves of the earth, the regions not managed by human inhabitants are still not wilderness as we define the word. Vegetation grows abundantly, but does not battle and crowd for space. Trees are not so thickly proliferate as to block out the light on the forest floor. Because of the commanding presence of the high-natured devas within the interior world, abundance does not breed chaos. Life abides in controlled symmetry. Pervading is a splendor to the eye of the fullness in nature without an encroaching density to threaten that very profundity that is so impelling to our senses. The Noshas long ago relinquished their sovereignty upon the surface of the planet. They await a future age when their healing force may be allowed to restore our diminishing wonderlands. Until then, they continue to faintly touch our natural world. So beautiful is this touch. Thoth, as he lived as an Egyptian centuries ago, well, he wasn't actually an Egyptian, but in Egypt, exclaimed of our earth, "O the beauteous bosom of life, 'tis immortal longing, becoming of substance before my sight. Upon every leaf is inscribed the ancient verse. Beneath the paling moon is suspended the garden of the Lord, full and ripe for the receipt of his hand. I lower myself to kiss thee, sweet mother, as the sun finds root above thee, and the stars proceed before thee. Grace is thy name, holy is thy place before the Lord." In this 1981 transmission, I speak about the Nosha hovers bringing to the surface of the world the new forest, the new wonderlands. Well, I did not know at the time about the new Earth star, about the ascension process. So I would say now that that's not incorrect, but that it will take place in two stages. One is within the Pyramidus radius matrix. That is the foundation that we're going to reach before we ascend into the new Earth star, into World System 2. And then, of course, continuing into the new Earth. In conclusion, I would like to speak a little bit about the Flora kingdom in regard to certain plants and species and how important they are in the inner earth. The main one is the fungi. And of course, there's not exactly a plant. In a way, it isn't. But the fungus of the inner earth, and of course the surface earth, is extremely important. You all only need to watch the video, Fantastic Fungi, to get a really dynamic picture of this. It's on Netflix, and I highly recommend it. In the inner earth, the network of fungi beneath the ground is far more, not complex necessarily, but ordered, even more so than it is on the surface, and it's pretty ordered on the surface. It is also communicating in a greater way with the entire planet and with humanity. This communication is on a subliminal level in many respects, but it is acknowledged and tapped into consciously by the human beings in the inner earth. The fungi of the inner earth plays a great role in the transference of knowledge forms. And we're speaking of nature knowledge forms here, to the surface earth. But the problem with that is that there's a disconnect now between the surface and the inner. Gaia has been kind of twisted a little bit in her spine, and so the signals that should be coming up from the lower parts of the body through the heart chakra and then out into the limbs of the body and into the space above are not as receptive. This is why there is such need to help Gaia reestablish this connection so that we can progress into the Pyramidus Radius platform and beyond into World System 2, the new Earth star. We need to help her reconnect. And the fungi of the inner Earth needs to communicate far more continuously and deeply with the fungi of the outer Earth. This is how it was in the beginning, and it needs to be, to some degree at least, again. I have been shown how microbes in the inner earth do their job by breaking down vegetal matter and dead matter of any kind, as it does on the surface. However, it goes about it in a more selective manner, in a quicker and cleaner manner, because of the consciousness level of the entire program of light within the inner earth. Nature responds to that. Nature creates it, indeed, in many ways, or co-creates it at the very least. So there are no poisonous mushrooms. There's nothing that anyone could eat in the inner earth that would do them any harm. There are things that would do them more good than others, but they don't have, a bad fungus in their body, funguses that we get that, that are detrimental to us. Nothing like that happens, because the fungus in the inner earth is seeking the highest register of light. So it doesn't have to back up and feed on something else that would be better off not fed on. So that's how it works in there. And he tried to explain to me, Thoth did, about how a plant grows in the inner earth and how different it is in some ways to the surface earth. But I just didn't grasp it, and I didn't go back to it soon enough, so it's kind of gone right now. I mean, I could try to bring it back, but this video is getting longer and longer, so I won't. Not here anyway. But there are differences, and it's cleaner, it's neater, it's more responsive to the higher light cord, rather than having to back up and maneuver around certain things to get what it needs in regard to, microbes and even plants and the way they grow. That's why there's no entangled forests. All of this is beautifully aligned. That doesn't mean everything is perfect in the inner earth. As I've said before, they have this little problem with magnetism, with the magnetic levels in the inner earth, and they have to learn how to adjust to that and how to work with that, but they do so respectfully. They don't try to force things to happen. So it works out, Things would be a lot better if we behaved ourselves on the surface of the earth, because we interfere with certain vibrations of the interior, even though that interior is on a slightly removed dimension. One last thing I'd like to mention about plants. There's something in science called critical rotational position, and it's applied on the surface of the earth scientifically to the rotation of the plant on its stem to always follow the light source. Well, Thoth equates it also with the human brain on the stem of the spine. And that is a topic I dipped into on one of my previous videos, so I won't go into it here. However, in regard to plants of the inner earth, their sun source, their light source, is never moving. It dims and brightens, but it does not move in space. So aside from maybe moving a little bit to get light between two branches of a tree, and as I've already stated, there's not a thick enforestation, the plant really doesn't move that much to be able to get to that light source. This changes a lot of the dynamic in the inner psyche, we might say, of the plant, in the way it registers its survival instincts and its ability to focus on its growth process in a balanced manner. That's not to say that everyone should live in the inner earth. Plants have their way of adjusting to light and following the sun on the surface of the planets, and this is a good thing. But I'm just saying that it is different in the inner earth, and it reserves resources within the plant because it takes energy and concentration, we might say, for the plant to follow a moving sun, especially when there's a lot of forest density, a lot of topography differences. There's certain topography differences in the inner earth, but not so much except in those few frozen zones that are sort of magnetic anomalies that no one can enter. And there aren't that many, and they're pretty small, and no plants are there. So plants have a better way of being able to exist and focus on their existence in a utilitarian manner within a hollow sphere that has a central sun within it. Before I conclude with this discourse, there's just a few pieces I left out and I'd like to touch upon very quickly here. One is that they actually had dinosaurs in the inner earth a long time ago, but they were only vegetarian ones, no T-Rexes or anything like that. They were the plant-eating kind, mostly small, but some of the larger ones. The Nessie and all of these sea monsters in the lakes, these are inner earth dinosaurs that became trapped in deep water reservoirs between the two magnetic fields and managed to find a place to exit into another envelope of water deep within the caverns of the surface earth. And they come up out of that to make an appearance and to do some fishing and then go back into their deeper zones. Next, there are the Bigfoot of the inner earth, which they call the Alakami, Alagami, Alagami. The last pronunciation was the best, Alagami. And these beings are very specifically far more enlightened than their surface earth brethren, but that holds true for just about everything that's in the inner earth. And they commune very strongly with the human and the nature elements, and they're not running and hiding in the wilderness because we have a bunch of Bigfoot hunters after them. There's nothing like that going on. So there's a beautiful synergy with these beings. Of course, a whole video could be made on that. I'm just touching in on it at this time. And lastly, I wish to share with you about the giant tortoises of the inner earth. In my unpublished manuscript, Rune Weaving, that I wrote in the 1980s, I say of the rune Kano, Kano is the sweeping movement that rushes upward to be embraced by a long-awaited wisdom of self. It is the gesture of the gods that causes that great gust of air to blow our ships away from the jagged reef and bared rocks of the shallows into deep and revealing waters. The sages of the earth know the places of wisdom and await their revelation to mankind. It is said among the fartherings that in the passing of every 100 years, the wise ones in the land of the fire dragon, or China, gather together in a sacred place on the shore of a magical inlet. As dawn unfolds its sea wings, a call is sounded upon ancient horns. From the center of the sea, giant tortoises file to the shore, a fleet of 100 eternally living creatures parting the watery veil to present their shells for inscription. Upon the backs of these tortoises, the savants inscribe the development and knowledge gained within the century. These giant tortoises that came to the Chinese those eons ago were relatives of the inner earth tortoises, and very much the same thing occurs in the inner earth. These are tortoises of great wisdom in the nature realm, and they come to the savants of the ages in the inner earth and commune with them. Some sacred symbols are placed upon their shells with the permission of the tortoises, of course. But the interesting thing about that is that the inner earth tortoises have a healing mechanism that can literally erase the symbols at a certain time and present themselves for new symbols to be placed on their shells. Why do they do this? Because this has to do with the sacred geometry of the planet and the ability of the tortoise to use its shell and its neurovascular system beneath that shell to transmit these signals into the planet. Thank you for listening to this discourse. I hope it has been interesting and perhaps educational for you. Maybe the better word is enlightening.